Welcome to Interior Analysis. I'm Evan Westman,
I'm Jelani Kelly.
and today we're talking about Ex Machina, and we're joined again by Drexel screenwriting professor Matt Kaufhold.
Hi, everybody.
So the reason I saw this was because, Matt, you had everyone, at least for my year, you had every incoming freshman watch this. It was one of like four things I think we had to see beforehand. I'd like known about it before that because it like got some Oscar attention and stuff, but that was like how I got around to seeing it. So why did you choose this as the movie for everyone to watch coming in?
A little bit of backstory is that the faculty got together and we sort of tried to decide what we could do to engage incoming freshmen even before they hit campus. So we would send out a list of films that we wanted people to look at over the summer, and then we would pair those films with an in-person screening once everybody came to campus. And it would be, we'd pick a different pair, each faculty member would pick a different pair of films every year. So I believe that year I asked everybody to watch Ex Machina over the summer, and then when everybody hit campus in the fall, my guided screening was a screening of Blade Runner. The reason behind it was that, as you guys both know, one of the things about screenwriting and one of the things that I like to focus on is the way that story elements get recycled in films that come out generationally, but are also things that are pulled sometimes directly from the literary canon and updated for various reasons. So I picked Ex Machina because it covers some of the same territory, raises some of the same questions that Blade Runner does, but also comes out of a pretty long literary tradition of both cyberpunk and scientific horror that runs back even to Frankenstein.
Kind of to follow up on that, what other AI things have you both seen slash read?
That's a bit of a big question, kind of like opening Pandora's box a little bit. Obviously, Blade Runner, and I've read a bunch of the original material, the original Philip K. Dick story, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? But then I've also seen, tons of these films that are either AI or cyborg related kind of things. You can get into iRobot. You can get into the AIs that are at the heart of the Terminator saga. You can go back to really, bad stuff like Lawnmower Man. It sort of eventually pulls in the whole idea of relationships to the internet and virtual spaces also. And then you get into things like Tron and literature that's based on, like a lot of the William Gibson stories from Burning Chrome and the big novel of his Neuromancer. It's also a prevalent theme in a lot of comics.
Jelani, what other AI things have you seen?
2001: A Space Odyssey. I had to see that for like a music class. I wouldn't say it was my first time seeing a movie with AI in it, but maybe AI specific that, they were part of the whole plot. But some other examples I can give were more TV centered. So there was a YouTube series I think Jordan Peele produced, was called Weird City. And there was one, like episode 4 was it was called Smart House, and it was about an AI house that was jealous of one of it was like a lesbian couple, and the house was jealous of one of them because it wanted to be with the other or something like that. And the house was voiced by Mark Hamill. And my aunt also, that was like the episode she was in, which is the reason I watched that whole really odd series. But another, like, I guess TV example I've seen before is a lot of the Black Mirror episodes I feel deal with AI, but there was one specifically called White Christmas where I think like chips or something were implanted into people's minds, and they like recorded everything they did. Like, in order to pull information out, they extracted those chips, and they were essentially AI, and they would torture those chips to find out information that the person didn't want to tell. And at the end of the episode, there was a bit of like a harsh punishment, because, Black Mirror, where they left an AI in like a white space. Yeah, it was just a white space. It wasn't even a room. And they had a song playing for like over 1 million days or something like that as its punishment, like as its sentence. And it was like, it brought up the question, does it really like, is it really that bad because it's like artificial, or is it like treating a human the same way? So those are some examples.
It's interesting you brought up the TV stuff, because the more you think about it, almost every major sci-fi series is going to deal with the topic in one way or another. I mean, Star Trek: The Next Generation, the whole data storyline that runs in and out of all the seasons and basically all the movies as well is a question of, an AI, an artificially constructed being, and what's its relationship to humanity.
I was thinking that, like, it's interesting you brought up Black Mirror, because I hadn't really thought of this, but I feel like Ex Machina could almost be
a long black error. Yep.
Yeah, like, and it feels like it takes some kind of influence from Black Mirror too. I've only seen like 3 episodes of it, but it does feel like it could be in that same vein.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the other things that you guys mentioned, but I hadn't really thought of them when I was thinking of what other AI things I've seen, like 2001 but the ones I kind of compare this with, I guess, are Her, Westworld, and the Blade Runners. I don't know which one of them is like closest to this. In some ways, I think it's Her, because it's like they're pretty similar in that it's like a human falling in love with an AI, but also like a whole bunch of complexities, and it's like 2 very different takes on that. But then again, it feels like Ava is a little bit more like the hosts in Westworld, in that like people are relating to her like a computer, or like, I mean, Westworld, at least I'm not totally caught up on the new season, but in the first one, it's all kind of about like, it feels almost like an amusement park that's set up like a video game, kind of. We see how all the hosts are like limited by their code, which is kind of like the inverse. I mean, we'll get into talking about the way that Ava is like made and how her AI works, but I wanted to ask like what else you guys have seen, because I feel like with a topic like this, you kind of have to look at all of AI in fiction sort of as a whole, in a way, because they seem to kind of build on each other.
There was, I might bring up Black Mirror a lot, but there was another episode. I think it might have been the same actor, Caleb. He was playing an AI, I think, in one of the episodes. It's called Be Right Back. And that was dealing with, I guess, more of a relationship aspect of an AI, because the guy goes out to get something, and he says he'll be right back, but he dies in a car crash or something. And then the woman like finds an ad or something and gets an AI version of him made. She finds he's pretty much the exact same thing as the guy that died, and the guy that she was in a relationship with, but she just didn't feel the same with him. And like at the end of the episode, she just kept him in the attic, and he just stood there, and sometimes had her daughter come visit him, but other than that, she just kept him up there like storage, which was kind of effed up. But yeah, that was just another example.
Okay. The first topic I wanted to dive into was like the social commentary on technology. This definitely feels like it's posing a lot of questions, but it's also answering a lot of questions, I feel like. It feels very relevant to now. Like, there's a decent amount about data harvesting and like invasion of privacy. The main thing I want to start with is like, this has such a horror vibe to it. I think if you click through Netflix or like you go on IMDb or something, there are some cases where it's actually categorized as a horror movie. And like there's a few shots that I was like, this feels like he's shooting a horror movie
Mhm.
right now. I mean, I'm kind of a technophobe, so I guess that was played up a bit, maybe because I'm distrustful of technology to begin with.
The main thing I'd say is it's kind of funny that you're a self-avowed technophobe and yet we're in three different locations recording this in like a bunch of different ways. So you must be deeply uneasy by this whole process.
I've kind of
On
made my
the,
peace with it, I guess, but I do see the irony that you mentioned it.
it's interesting because Ex Machina plays a little bit like sort of body horror, especially in the scene where, Caleb starts to peel his own flesh back
Oh
to
God.
try and see whether he's actually been replaced, and when he's doubting sort of his own reality, and that kind of uncertainty pulls back the veil a little bit on one of the underpinnings of horror is sort of the loss of control or the loss of your own sanity, doubting whether what you see and what you're experiencing is actually real. And so that once he starts to do that and starts to doubt not only his own reality but his own existence, you're right that it definitely plants one foot into the horror realm. And then when they follow up on that later on, when Ava goes and looks at the other prototypes and takes the flesh from them, there's definitely sort of weird horror vibe there. Although it's curious that when she does it, it's particularly bloodless when she's replacing the overskins. But when Caleb does it, there's blood everywhere.
How do characters in movies do stuff like that? Like, I guess it's because it's a movie, but like, it doesn't seem realistic to me because they never show any sort of expression whatsoever when harming themselves. Like, when somebody's punching a wall or slitting their wrist to see if they're real, like, I don't, I've never understood that. Like, that kind of, that should hurt, right?
Here's the question that'll really blow your mind, though, is does that in any way signify the fact that Caleb isn't real?
Hmm.
Wow.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I realize that's a whole nother like level of stuff. I don't think we're supposed to jump to that conclusion, but I think there's also stuff in the film that puts Caleb outside sort of the normal kind of human parameters. In a lot of ways, the Oscar Isaac character kind of cuts Caleb out of the herd to use him specifically for this. So there's already something about Caleb that makes him different. So I think some of those things, like the body mutilation, help us to understand, sort of how different Caleb is.
Mm.
Yeah, because he is kind of like more aware of like just AI in general. Like I think if any of us probably went to do the Turing test like this, we wouldn't necessarily jump to, am I a computer? I mean, I don't know about you two, but I definitely don't understand computers well enough to like think that I might be
No.
one.
No.
And I think he probably does.
Mhm.
One thing I was noticing too, though, is like in that those two scenes you were talking about, Matt, is that like the score is totally different when like Caleb's checking if he is a robot. It's like blasting this like I guess it's not EDM, but like electronic like super loud vibe. And then when Ava's going through with all the other iterations of herself, kind of and peeling off the skin, it's like this light piano or something. It's like it's a very different. You're supposed to like get a very different feeling from those two moments.
Do you remember what music was playing when Kyoko did it? I don't remember. I'm just asking. Like when she peeled off her rib and face.
No, that's a good question though, because that would be kind of interesting to know with that.
The one thing that we have to, sort of keep in mind and remind your listeners about is that any one of these topics that we're sort of opening the door on, we could actually walk through into that room and spend an hour, easily talking about any of these particular topics.
Yeah, I think we theoretically could do 3 episodes on this and it wouldn't cover everything. Like, even just on like a story level, there's a ton to unpack. So the next thing I kind of wanted to talk about was that Nathan mentions at one point that AI is inevitable. He's like, yeah, this is like been gearing up for years, but it's not. Like, it's a deliberate thing that he's trying to make and that we're trying to make. So like, it's a choice. I mean, that's my take on it. I don't think there's any way at this point that we're going to stop trying to make AI. Whether we're going to be successful is a completely different question. But I don't know if you guys have any take on that.
I guess the way I've sort of been looking at this and thinking about that question is, in a certain sense, it all depends on how we're, defining artificial intelligence. And if we're talking about full-blown sentient beings that function on their own, then maybe that's inevitable, maybe not. But at some point, some of these things already exist to a certain extent because computers are they've been programmed to make, certain basic decisions on certain things. They can recognize voices and speech patterns. I think the subtler question is when are they, sort of autonomously making their own decisions? And I'm not sure where, the edge of those things is right now. The thing that's really pervasive and really creepy about, what Nathan says is that there are people like Nathan that are working on this stuff now, and the regular people who are walking around in their everyday lives don't have any idea what's going on. The really scary thing that this film presents is that like one Zuckerbergian guy with an infinite amount of money could essentially let a genie out of the bottle that we can't ever put back in the bottle. And of course that wraps back into the horror things. And then that's not even really touching whatever's going on in the military industrial complex, because just the data analysis that's involved in all of that, there's some AI that's probably already in use that we don't know about.
That's one of the things that scares me most, I guess, about technology is like the sort of beta AI that, or like first generation AI that's already in place. Like when my computer can guess what I'm thinking, it never feels good. I've had like some issues with like the editing software that I use to edit this show on the past couple weeks, which is really frustrating. But at the same time, it feels nice that I am smarter than my computer. At least I can think that. Like that's comforting to me on
Right.
some level. I guess it is a point that we're at now where we're kind of on the borderline of like whether our technology is smarter than we are. I think something that this movie brings up a bit is that like if we do create something smarter than us, by definition, we kind of have given it control. It can kind of do what it wants. For Nathan to create something that is actually his definition of AI, it has to be something that he can't figure out every detail of. Ava can learn and evolve within herself without him as the creator doing anything, which is cool on one level, but then again, it comes back to bite him at the end.
I think it ties into a lot of technological fears, a lot of questions that we have as a society and as humans about the encroachment of technology into our personal space and the gradual blending of how our lives are intertwined with that technology. If you stop and think about, the ubiquity of cell phones, and then you realize that, the first, what we would consider smartphone is really only a little over 10 years old. The speed and rapidity with which that's taken over a dominant portion of our days is certainly something that gives people pause. I've often wondered about these films. In fact, all the ones we referenced, the presentation of that technology is pretty much universally negative, where the technology takes over, gradually outstrips mankind, and then either ends up destroying mankind or enslaving mankind somehow, which speaks to sort of a really deep technological fear. But if we're creating these things to actually help us, how is it that we've managed to be so afraid that it's not going to help us and it's going to kill us?
Well, I would say the one exception of the examples we listed of the AI taking over is her. I mean, we don't have to get into it because that's a separate conversation, but like, I guess the only real difference between her and, I mean, I haven't seen all the other ones that you guys referenced, but of all the ones I have seen, the main difference I see with that is that the AIs in that movie have actual human emotions. Like, they empathize, they're looking to connect with people and not to take over. And they're very much like separate as computers, but they have like social desires. And that's kind of like the heart of what that movie's about. So I don't know if we want to call that more or less realistic. If we create a computer that is like a human, what do we define as like a human? I don't know if that's like something that actual tech people are asking themselves right now, but maybe they should.
That's the central question, I think, in the Blade Runner movies, where the idea is pretty prevalent that the replicants are actually more humanistic and more sympathetic than the actual humans are. You know, the question is, where do we want this technology to go, and who are we to kind of be the ones to program it? Like, if we're deeply flawed as individual beings to begin with, aren't we just going to make the same mistakes when we program and imprint something else?
Yeah, that was just gonna be my point. Like, well, yeah, why would we try to replicate us if we're not even good to begin with? Which is probably why all of these depictions of AI, if they're based off of us, why the AI tries to either like kill us because they see us as a problem, or becomes like us and tries to kill us because of that. We're not a good example for AI to be created or replicated from as humans, I'd say.
Well, to follow up on that, I was planning to ask this later, but since we brought it up, I'll ask it now. Like, what's your take on robot characters? Because, Jelani, you've said a couple times on the show that, like, you're not really into human characters.
Yeah. I just don't like humans. I guess I'll start with that. Like, I just see a lot of bad qualities in humans in general. But the other part to that was like I don't find, well, it's not that I don't find stories about humans as interesting, but when you create a world where there's something better than humans, I tend to lean towards the thing that's not human. For example, and this is, you probably see this coming, superheroes. When you have an entire world full of gods, essentially, that can do whatever the hell they want, I am 100% not leaning towards anybody that's running around in a cape and spandex like Batman. So if you have robot characters in your world, like they're the element that's not necessarily a part of this real world, like your big buy, I'm probably leaning towards them. Because like I said, I don't see a lot of great qualities in humans as a species.
Wow, this conversation took a really depressing turn.
It did. Well,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think that's kind of inevitable given like the tone of this movie. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
that's true.
I don't know if we should be that surprised, but that we did bring up something else I was thinking of, which is like, it's weirdly impressive to us, I feel like, as just humans in general, if we can approximate humanity in something else, be that a machine or like a really well developed character. Even something like Siri, like when people talk to Siri like it's a person, which I guess is the whole premise of her. But like in real life, people will mess around and like I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I've had friends who just like occasionally will pull out Siri and be like, I don't know, they'll ask it some dumb question or whatever. But it's like it's kind of impressive to us when Siri answers like a little bit more of a human or something.
Mm.
That just seemed like something that was sort of layered in this movie that like Ava's not acting completely like a human, but like Caleb is just blown away when she does anything that like crosses the line from computer to human, which I'm not trying to invalidate that feeling because I mean all of us kind of have it. I don't know if it totally relates to what you were saying, Jelani, but it's like we even understand ourselves well enough to like imitate ourselves correctly?
Right.
Well, I think the other thing that is compelling about the way Ava's behaving is that when you get to the end of the film and she's on her own and she's orchestrated the whole escape, you realize that even though she's, artificial, she's actually been pretending to be artificial the whole time because she's been pretending to be Caleb's idea of what he expects to find and then gradually stretches it. But she's ahead of all of them, and so she's already out thinking all the humans in the space, even though she's the one that's locked up.
Yeah, there were a lot of points where I highlighted in the script where I was asking, is she playing dumb here with Caleb? And I think I mean, from what you're saying, I think from some of them, we can definitely say yes. I don't know which ones exactly, but she seems kind of naive about, or at least uninformed about the outside world. And I guess there's no real way to know this, but if she's programmed through a computer and has, I mean, Nathan mentions how he like programmed in all of these like facial expressions and stuff and how he just crammed so much data in there. I feel like maybe if that's true, she actually does know about the outside world. And it was an interesting thing that I was wondering at a lot of points is like, can she imitate being a human better than she is throughout this whole movie? And just isn't showing that as a tactic for escaping.
I think absolutely that she's got the answers to most of the questions already. And she's manipulating everyone in order to manufacture her escape from this box that she's been put in. And you could, I guess, read that as, a metaphor for human society as well. Like we're all struggling to escape from the boxes that other people put us in from exterior observation. There's only so much you can know about a person, and we put them inside boxes in our head. Oh, that's the really smart guy. Oh, that's the really beautiful girl. Oh, that's the politician who's a liar and a cheat. And it's really hard for people to escape those definitional boxes, no matter how much information you have about them. But if you think about it, for Ava to understand not only how she works, but to have won the sympathies of the other AI, as well as be outthinking her own creator and the other person he's brought in, she's running rings around everybody. It's kind of a weird revelation at the end when she just kind of walks out of there and you realize that all of the sort of innocence ingenue kind of thing that she was putting on was basically a role play for Caleb's benefit.
I personally was not surprised that she ended up screwing him over at the end and just leaving him there. But I think that's also, I think part of that was the marketing because they seemed to play up Ava as almost more of like a monster kind of in the trailers. It didn't seem like she was someone we should trust. And
Mm.
I mean, again, I'm a technophobe, so I went in not trusting her anyway. So
I didn't know who to trust in the beginning. Like, I just thought at one point I was thinking everybody was just an AI and this was all a simulation. I was just trying to figure out whose simulation it was, and at one point I didn't think anybody was real in this movie.
That would have been kind of cool, though.
Yeah, I mean Kyoko was a robot. I think I figured that out pretty early in the movie though. Like, oh, she can't speak English. Maybe she's not human. Wait, those things don't connect. Never mind.
no, it's a fair point though, because like I don't think I figured that out until we find out for real. It's an interesting thing because it's kind of another Turing test. Like
Mm-hmm.
in any case, Caleb doesn't realize it, so it's kind of a second Turing test that Nathan's bringing on him without him even realizing it. Is that he already has a robot walking around the house
Mm-hmm.
passing for human.
What I thought like would have been pretty crazy is if Kyoko was actually the I guess mastermind behind Blue Book. Like if Nathan was the AI the whole time. Like, because the way she was acting in the beginning and the certain shots held on her, I thought she was just listening to them the entire time, just gathering information. And I don't know. I just thought that would have been a cool twist if she was the actual human in the situation, and Caleb was talking to Nathan, who was an AI the whole time. So
That's maybe like an accidental, like kind of a happy accident for Alex Garland that maybe some people reacted like that
Mm-hmm.
because it kind of adds another layer to an already complex thing. Here's another question I have, and this is kind of transitioning into the next topic, which I guess we're kind of already in, which is crafting an AI character. At what point was the Turing test passed for both of you? Or was it passed at all? Like, when did you
Mm-hmm.
read Ava as like a fully realized AI?
That's an interesting question because I think that in the film, which is so lush in its visuals, even though it's sort of a really spare design, the way that Ava is presented to us is, in a certain sense, presented the same way that Caleb is dealing with her, and in that we see a very physical being, and even though we can see her inner workings, and that can be a bit scary, there's also a certain amount of fascination there. It's like looking at a cobra behind glass. You know it's dangerous, but it's also really beautiful to watch. And so, in some sense, the audience is deflected away from the fact that this is supposed to be an artificial creature. And we are encouraged to relate to her through the way Caleb relates to her. And he is so obviously sort of drawn and attracted to her from the very start that the question of her passing the Turing test is sort of secondary because everything appears real and functional to us, which is that's a weird bit of psychology to dabble in a film, because we're always suspect of the reality that we're watching. And once you start undermining the reality that we're watching, that's when an audience sort of loses contact with the story. So that it's a very dangerous tightrope to walk when you're creating a character within the story that's supposed to be artificial, because it draws attention to the artificiality of the medium that we're talking about. It's a very dangerous road that walks, but I think it does it successfully because we're drawn in through Caleb to Ava, and the film's crafted so that it constructs our reactions to mirror his.
Yeah, because like one thing I noticed in revisiting it is the way that Nathan frames it. He says, the point isn't to hide Ava from you. The point is to show her or to show you that she's a robot and then test her anyway. It's cool that Alex Garland made that choice to like do it like that because that of course is how we as the audience are entering it too. Like because we're watching a movie, we know okay, this is a movie. Like we read the tagline, we're like, all right, there's an AI character in this, so he doesn't even bother trying to trick us with that.
Mm-hmm.
Jelani, when was the Turing test passed for you, if at all?
I don't think she passed it at all. The entire time, I thought I was just thinking over and over, "That's a robot. That's a robot." They're showing me that's a robot. She's not a real person. The whole time, I'm just repeating that to myself in my head. And then once the first shutdown or whatever it was called happened, like the power outage, and she's like, "You can't trust Nathan," and I'm like, "Oh, so that means we can't trust you. So I don't trust you." So I thought originally that it was both her and Nathan like playing Caleb like, "Oh, you're the real puppet all along. We're just doing this for some sort of effed up reason." But no, I never trusted her and I never didn't see her as a robot.
Yeah, that triangle of trust between them, like I thought about going into that, but it gets all sorts of complicated, like you were talking about, because it's like one, like, does Caleb trust Nathan? And that's sort of its own question, but then does he trust Ava? But that also gets played into by does he trust Nathan because Nathan created Ava, so like it gets all sorts of screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I did notice is that, at least the way I read it, Caleb seems to trust Ava pretty much the whole way through, which
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's him being gullible, but he's like a really smart guy, we can see, although not quite smart enough, obviously. But what do we make of the fact that he trusts her?
If I was in his shoes, first of all, with that first power outage, I would have went straight to Nathan after and be like, "Yo, your robot said you can't be trusted. First of all, why would your robot say that? But second, I'm just letting you know because I don't trust the robot." He did make a joke. I don't know if this was before or after. He did make a joke about, and I don't know if he was serious. I kind of believed him about killing the people that constructed the place. Did we think that was real?
That's interesting because I think in the script it said it added an action line that was Nathan kind of nodding to like, I'm kidding. And I don't know if he said it or not, but then they cut that out in the movie.
No, he just chuckled and then sipped his alcohol or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like confirmed either way, but like that is scary. That like, and I think that came like pretty late, I want to say. But even so,
Okay.
there's
Okay.
reasons. Caleb's in this house that he's stuck in, and with the power outages, he realizes it can be kind of a prison. I don't remember if this was my reaction initially, but I wondered if we're supposed to read the first couple power outages as being caused by Nathan.
Yeah, that's what I read him as at first. Like it was purposefully done, and he was watching them during the. I mean, he ended up doing that anyway by putting the camera there, but purposefully doing that so to think they were unmonitored, and that ended up being his plan in the end anyway.
Yeah, but like for him to say that, obviously he's not like an architect, but him claiming that he can't get his own house that he designed to work is a little bit of like
Right.
Steve Jobs couldn't get an iPhone to work or something like that. It seems a little bit far-fetched, but I guess that even kind of plays up how powerful Ava is and how dangerous she can be.
Speaking on Ava's power, another thing I kind of liked about this movie was that most of the time when an AI is crafted like with a physical form in movies or TV shows, like the AI can just straight up kill a human without any effort whatsoever. And that's another thing I don't like about humans, how fragile we are as far as physicality can go. But like normally the AI can just, like I said, straight up just murder a human if they wanted to. And that's what I was kind of expecting to happen. I mean, she did do it, but with the help of a weapon. Like, I was expecting Ava, when she was first on top of Nathan, to just overpower him. And I'm like, oh, God, here we go again. A creator made a machine that's stronger than him, and she's just going to kill him because he was dumb enough to give her, I guess, strong enough circuitry or whatever to be able to do something like that. And then he flipped her over, and I was like, oh, wait, what? And then he, like, started fighting back, and I was like, so that she can't just straight up beat him.
But she's able to fix herself quickly, so it's like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Kyoko couldn't, though.
well, I guess it's also a question of like, I mean, there were those other robots already in the house, so like when Ava's out in the world now, I guess she's not necessarily invincible anymore unless she can just make more of herself, I guess.
When she's out in the real world, nobody knows that she's an AI. You know, there's no,
True, yeah.
she's not in any more danger than an average human at that point.
That's true.
The thing that I thought was really interesting about the way that Nathan created Ava was the design of her brain. He describes it as like one, he plugged like his whole search engine Blue Book into it for like giving it information. But then he talked about how, like, I think he called it wetware is like the design of her brain, and it can
Yeah.
like shift for thoughts and hold for memories. Like, I thought that was really cool. I don't know how similar that is to brain design, but like it was so refreshing to see something where science is treated like science in a movie and not just like magic. We've created an AI, like I hacked this algorithm or whatever. That feels like the Jurassic Park kind of approach. If they, I mean, I know that's a totally different thing, but like the typical way that something like that would be handled, it actually feels like a human brain. Like, I don't get the science of it, but I buy it. Like, if that's how an AI is created, like, yeah, that sounds like it could work. So I don't know if you guys have anything you want to say about that, but I thought that was really cool.
I think Garland found an interesting shorthand for how brains work. And from a screenwriting point of view, it's great because it's, you know, a fairly concise explanation that everybody can understand. It seems plausible. I mean, it sounds plausible. It allows you to jump past all the really amazing technological things that would need to happen to kind of go into that. Because one of the challenges with programming AIs is that our brains are able to build new connections between disparate pieces of memory and nerves and neurons and all that kind of stuff. But computers so far are not. So essentially, you focused in on the one core thing that is needed to make that kind of final leap, and they sort of get around it with that one nifty little sentence and the jelly looking silicon brain that he's, you know, messing around with when he's talking about that. It's kind of interesting the way they managed to leapfrog past what would essentially be like the next generation of computer advancement. And they're already, I mean, some computer research is now working on that kind of flexible memory inside cubes rather than binary stuff, but it requires all kinds of really high-tech superconductors that only operate at really low temperatures, and it's highly theoretical at this point. It's close enough that they actually have some of the science right. That's one of the things that a lot of the cyberpunk literature, and even it's where AIs and cyberpunk mix into like hard sci-fi in the literature, where they talk about things that are operating on Planck scale connections and things like that, which gets like really tedious really fast. But in the script and in this film, they managed to sort of jumpstart that whole question, and it sounds plausible enough that the audience just kind of goes, "Oh, okay, that makes sense," and it gets you
Yeah, but
past
like,
having to explain how the AI works.
but he does explain it more than I would have expected. Like even in those like couple, I don't even know if we want to call them like cheat code lines, but like the lines that allow our suspension of disbelief, like layered in that, just I can feel that like Alex Garland just understands so much about AI theory and how the human brain works. Like you can tell he really did the
Oh yes,
research before starting this, which I really appreciate that. Like all the conversations that Nathan and Caleb have throughout the movie about how Ava works and what counts as AI and like how they're relating to her as a human versus a computer. Like I find those like endlessly fascinating, even though I'm not really
the
into
amazing
computers.
well, the amazing thing about it is not just that he did the research and has a firm grasp of the science, but he's able to kind of distill the absolute salient points down in a way that's still understandable for a general audience. You know, they sound like they're
Hmm.
scientists talking about it, but we can still understand it. I'm pretty sure that if I was in a room with, actual AI programmers, once they would start talking, after about 2 seconds, I would have no idea what they're talking about. But this feels like, the right stuff. And it feels like we have at least a basic understanding of what's going on.
For sure. Like I think it's being dumbed down for us in a way, but in a way it's also not because like Caleb going in as like the audience surrogate character, he's not really us. Like he's a lot more knowledgeable than most viewers about it, which is I think it's a great choice. But it's like counterintuitive to what you normally want to do with like an expositionary character. Like he ends up explaining a lot of the AI theory where like normally you would expect Nathan to be the one doing that. But I think because of the subject matter, it actually is part of it that they do have to talk about it in basic terms. Like Nathan keeps bringing up, and I do think this is a little bit of Garland, like kind of, I don't want to say cheating, but a little bit like that because he keeps having Nathan be like, Caleb, I don't want you to talk about Ava like she's a computer because part of it is, yeah, just for exposition, but part of it, I think, also is that it's kind of cutting at his pride and like sort of disproving her AI. To Nathan, Ava's AI is proven if Caleb can just talk about her like a regular person rather than a computer.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think it's also, it plays into the sort of monomaniacal character that Nathan is, that he doesn't want to talk about things that he sees as kind of proprietary technology, which it gives Garland an excuse to get past sort of overly technical discussions, because it's like, let's not talk about the we're not going to talk about the mechanics. Let's just talk about how you relate to her.
Mhm. I think the thing he really wants us to think about, how should we relate to AIs? I think he thinks we should be scared of them. Like he doesn't seem to be pulling any punches with that.
Let me just say one thing, which was that the weirdest thing to me about this movie, and it sort of goes with a question you asked earlier about, sort of how Caleb trusts Ava immediately. The weirdest thing to me about the movie is how he's so willing to trust Nathan when Nathan is like sort of super creepy right from the beginning, and yet it takes Caleb a really long time to figure out that there's something else going on with Nathan.
Yeah, but he does kind of seem to be a little bit suspicious of him. Maybe not suspicious enough, but maybe he's also going into this whole week thinking like that he's just kind of going to be getting to interview Nathan basically and just pick his brain about stuff.
Yeah.
That's a fair point, though. There were a couple questions I had about like the design of Nathan as a character, though. Like, I don't think these are problems. Like, I really like how much personality Caleb and Nathan both have because like it's way more than they need to for like their plot function, but it makes them so much more interesting to watch. But like we see Nathan working out a lot, and we see him getting drunk a lot in this movie. Both of those things kind of pay off where he like Caleb's able to hack his system after he gets him drunk the one night, and then he's like fighting the AI and loses, even though he's like clearly really strong. And then he like punches Caleb at the one point, and Caleb's just out. But even those couple things, those feel like really small payoffs for the amount of time that we see him drinking and working out. So, like, why do you think he's like that? Aside from just making him like a total programmer stereotype.
Is that a stereotype? I
Don't.
I mean, it is in Silicon Valley, the TV show.
oh
Yeah, I've been rewatching that with my brother the past couple nights, and it comes up in like the first episode.
because I don't think I've ever seen a programmer like this before. Like I've never seen Silicon Valley, so maybe that's why. But
I mean, it does kind of defy the old stereotype, but I feel like I've met a couple of people like, I mean, again, I'm not into computers, but I feel like there is a little bit of like a new sort of like masculinity around programmers now that Nathan sort of embodies. So maybe that's all Garland's going for with this, but I do wonder why we see him being such a bro in this movie.
maybe just the personality thing. Also, it's a pretty lonely thing. Like he's the only human out. I mean, it was his choice, but he is the only human out there. He essentially created everything that's around him, except when Caleb gets there. So, I would say that that might be part of the reason. Like he's probably depressed.
I think there's a couple lines in the script that got cut out in the movie that talk about like he actually does have to like call world leaders and stuff because I mean he's basically like Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs or someone like that. So and he's running a whole company, so I mean he's got to have contact with some kind of people. But yeah, I mean he is what like hours of driving away from anything, and the only way in and out seems to be from like his private helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
I would think another part of it is partially to ground him in a very physical way, because so much of what they're actually grappling with is this intangible cerebral question. And also that in a certain way, Nathan's focus on all those very physical things, especially when Caleb is around, sort of mirrors the same approach he's using with the Turing test with Ava. They're dangling the physical stuff to both entice him in to relating to Ava, but also to sort of show him something physical and tangible. And I don't know, maybe there's a mirroring that's happening between it's a test case and a control case. Like here are two very physical beings, and how do you relate to each one of those? And you could argue that Caleb's relationship to both of them is actually kind of strange. I mean, if Caleb went in and did a Turing test on Nathan, what would the result be?
I hadn't thought of that. I did notice though that Nathan does a lot of playing up Ava's sexuality to Caleb as he's talking about it, which to me that felt a little bit like cheating because he's like trying to point Caleb to look at certain parts of the test and like do his Turing test in a certain way, which I think from like an actual integrity of the Turing test, that's kind of cheating on his part. But he's also like, it feels like he's kind of shaming Caleb for not thinking like him and thinking of Ava as a computer and not as just any other girl. I don't know how layered that gets, but it's something that Nathan brings up a few times. Like very specifically, he like steers conversations toward that at a few points.
Well, isn't it also the whole thing that Nathan tells Caleb that he's doing a Turing test on Ava, but really Nathan has brought Caleb in as a test for Ava? Isn't that sort of what's going on there? Like the test is really to see if Ava can make Caleb fall in love with her. Caleb's kind of like the white mouse. I mean, you think Caleb is the one who's testing Ava, but it's really Ava's being tested on Caleb.
Mm.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I kind of thought of it as like Caleb thinks of himself as like rescuing the damsel in distress, but really he's a fly getting lured into like a Venus flytrap. Another question I had, and I don't know if we're going to be able to find a definite answer for this, but do you guys think this is the first time Nathan has done one of these tests? Because, I mean, obviously we see that he has like 7 earlier versions of his AI, but Caleb mentions at some point, he's like, I wasn't lucky, I was selected. And like, it's obvious, why would you want to do a random test if you could just get the janitor? Do we think maybe Nathan did at one point just like bring in some random guy and test it out with like the earlier versions? I feel like that's a possibility. And I wonder if that happened.
I mean, it's possible, but
I didn't the first time around, but I did find myself thinking that.
if that was a possibility, why wouldn't they be on, like, didn't Caleb go back at one point on all of Nathan's footage and see him crafting some of the earlier models? Like, wouldn't that have been a good time to show if he was bringing other people into the facility? I mean, it's probably just a thought question, but like, if it were in the movie, I think that would have been the best time.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess if he was going through all the footage and Nathan had actually done Turing tests with them, he would have kept video of that. Also, just from a creative perspective, maybe he wanted to wait until he perfected it. Like, I know when I make something, I don't want to show it to anyone until I'm like actually happy with it, just in general. So maybe he didn't want to show anyone a robot that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much all the points I have. Do you guys have anything else you want to mention or like questions you want to pose before we finish?
Not me. I'll just say, thanks, because it was fun to talk about this film. Now my head hurts a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. And we didn't even get into like a whole bunch of other stuff that we probably could have. It shows a mark of good writing that Garland is able to do so many things at once, but it does make it a little bit tough to talk about.
I'm looking back at my reaction notes, and there were a few physical things like that made me think, oh, this person's an AI. Oh, maybe this person is an AI. The scar on Caleb's back when he took his shirt off and he's like standing in the mirror or something, made me think he was glued together, kind of like how Ava was, like put together. And when he started talking about the car crash, it made me think maybe he was given those memories, like to make him think himself real. And then what made me think Nathan was an AI at some point was there were really like weird cuts and shots at some points. Like for whatever reason, there was like a quick zoom in shot when Nathan was filling up like the kettle or something like that. And I was like, okay, why was that there? Like, is the kettle important? The kettle was never important. But another shot when I think Caleb and Nathan were talking, and then Caleb left the room, and then Nathan just sat there, sipping on his alcohol. And they zoomed in on like the reflection between Caleb and then the table. And in the table reflection, it looks like it's just Nathan's face showing, like the front part of his face. It was resembling Ava, like his face, and then the back of him would just be like, I guess, just robotic parts, kind of like Ava. But that also made me think Nathan was an AI because of that shot. And it was probably, 100% was a fake out, and maybe I was digging too deep there. But for some reason in this movie, I was really paying attention to certain shots and such. And like you said before, it did feel like a horror movie, because at some point when I was watching on the cameras, it was like really quiet and everything, and I was like expecting a jump scare at any point. I was like, wait, this is a sci-fi movie, right? Yeah, those are just some other things I wanted to add.
Well, I wouldn't say those are like reading into it too much, because you actually kind of brought up something that, like, I know in the Blade Runner movie that came out a couple of years ago, they did play with machines being given memories.
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing you were talking about with Caleb, like that they kind of did that in Blade Runner, and then also like in Westworld, pretty much throughout that entire show, like anytime you meet a new character, which this is kind of what I enjoy about watching some of Westworld, is that like anytime you meet a new character, you have to wonder, are they a robot? Are they a human? And sometimes it takes a while to figure it out. Sometimes you know right away. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it is speaking to how kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, that when you talk about AI in fiction, you kind of have to talk about all of AI in fiction in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just some closing things. Once again, Descended Awakening is available to buy on Amazon and in print. Our next episode we're planning to do is Ready or Not, which is, I mean, I haven't actually watched it yet, but it came out last year. It's been mentioned on the show before as a modern day Clue. Jelani, I don't know if you want to talk about that because you actually have seen it.
It's not a modern day Clue, but it was good. I liked it.
Yeah, so we can look forward to that. You can send in questions, comments, suggestions, or requests to intanalysis18@gmail.com. You can find the show on Twitter at intanalysis18. You can find me on Twitter at Davos Watson. Where can people find both of you guys?
I'm on Twitter at Jelani T. Kelly and on Instagram at Base Phoenix. I also have a Discord server now for just writing in general, so that's there too.
And Matt?
Anybody who wants to follow me and see either political rants or pictures of cocktails, you can find me on Twitter at Script King.
Okay, that pretty much wraps things up. Matt, thanks for coming on, and Jelani, thanks for another good episode. So, and thank all of you for listening. So we'll see you next time.
Bye.